the chat is going to be recorded. So just so you know, and you're conscious of that. We also ask everyone to be respectful with the speakers and with one another. In the event that there's any disruption, we do have the right to remove people from the event. And so we will do so. We're gonna spend a little bit of time also later on to have a conversation in breakout groups. There's gonna be 2 different breakout groups, and we ask for, everyone to participate, ask questions, and also step up or step back. So if you feel that you're maybe speaking a lot, take a step back and allow for others to speak as well. Or if you feel like maybe you're not sharing enough, and I know everybody has important information and knowledge, experiences to share, we invite you to step up into the space as well. So those are some of the ground rules. Lastly, we want to ensure that we make a land acknowledgement. We're here in the West San Fernando Valley, and the West San Fernando Valley covers areas of Native communities, including the Fernandino Tatavian communities, and whose land we sit on, as well as parts of the Chumash people who lived here for many, many years before many of us were here. So acknowledging the land that we sit in and we organize in today. The West Valley People's Alliance is a relatively new alliance of individuals who are committed to making a difference and improving our communities here in the West San Fernando Valley. We came around when right around the time that the killing of George Floyd took place, and then soon after unrest and actions. We helped organize the largest march here in the West Valley with the Black Lives Matter march in coordination and support with the Black Lives Matter Northridge, as well as other progressive and grassroots organizations in the San Fernando Valley and the West Valley. And we're committed to continue to building together, and one of the reasons why we're holding this event. So we're excited that many of you are joining us today, and we look forward to the conversations. I am gonna invite Olivia Powell, who's also one of the leaders of the West Valley People's Alliance, to talk a little bit more about the purpose and the overview of the program.
Hi, thank you, Carlos. I'm Olivia Powell, and I'm a member of the West Valley People's Alliance, and I'm a resident here in Chatsworth. So I just want to go over with you the purpose in having this event and this conversation today. Well, as residents, all of us of the San Fernando Valley here in the City of Angels, we're coming together to demystify, educate, and engage each other in this timely conversation around what the priorities of our city ought to be. As stakeholders, we strive to connect the Valley to the larger city conversation as a whole on this matter, right? Because there's been a lot going on about the budget that a lot of us, and myself included, had not paid such close attention to in the past. And so it's something that we're all learning about. And there have been groups, such as the speaker that we're going to have today with the from the People's Budget LA, who have been working on this, and there have been several years now of work around this. So we want to uplift the work that they've been doing in this regard. Also, I want to connect this as this is an event put together by the Racial Justice Committee from the West Valley People's Alliance, that for people who may not be aware, we had a shooting in Reseda on Friday where a police officer shot a young man who was having a mental health crisis. His mother called 911 for help, and in the meantime, he ran out of the house with a kitchen knife and ended up being shot 2 times by the police. As of my knowledge, he's still alive. I'm not sure of the current updates on that, but we want to point out that police shootings are a West Valley issue. Funding and the police and the budget of the city as a whole is an issue for us here. And we definitely have a need for mental health services here, and not just police with guns. So that's part of our really timely purpose in having this event. Let's see here. So an overview just of the program we'll be having today is, first, we're going to have Zach Villette he's a board member of the West Hills Neighborhood Council. He'll be giving us a little overview of what the current LA budget looks like. Then Jeff from the West Valley People's Alliance is going to introduce the concept of the People's Budget LA. Then we'll have Reverend Anderson be speaking on the People's Budget. And then we'll do a Q&A, a general one. And then we'll have a couple of breakouts where in groups we're going to be able to have a little bit of conversation and reimagining together. And yeah, and then finally we'll look at some next steps together of what can we do to move this forward for our community. All right, so I'm going to pass this over to Zach to take us over what the current LA budget looks like. Zach, do we
Hi, everyone. Hi, yeah, sorry, I was on mute. Hello, everyone. So what you're seeing on screen right here, what Jeff has up, this was presented at our West Hills Neighborhood Council Government Relations Committee meeting. We had the budget, which is Council File 20-0600 on the agenda. And so I went through and really what I was trying to do was put together some slides to show how just colossally inappropriate this budget is, given all the factors with COVID and the economy and unemployment, and how in the greater picture this budget is just so insufficient for the moment that we're in right now. So I'm glad that I got to use these slides one more time for something instead of having to mothball them. So Jeff, whenever you're ready, we can go through them. So this was just a quote, right, that I found about sort of what your priorities are and how the budget reflects that. You know, lots of people, our city council, our mayor, they have lots of flowery words and they love to talk about how much work and how hard they're trying and all the stuff they're doing. But when you take a look at the actual budget, where this money is coming, going to, I think it paints a very different picture from all that flowery language. So this slide is a breakdown of the LA City budget appropriations. I know everybody sees lots of sort of different and maybe conflicting numbers on like what the actual budgets are, but for the purpose of this slide deck and when I originally presented this, neighborhood councils were supposed to really only narrow our focus on city items. And so this was straight from that council file in the mayor's budget summary. So this is the appropriations by department in Los Angeles for the Los Angeles city budget. And you guys can see, the police budget is just insanely bloated and massive. And, Jeff and I joked, it's the only one who's got a column over there with in the 10-digit spot, right? So unfortunately, you look down at the end of this list, Civil and Human Rights Commission, and Neighborhood Empowerment, Public Accountability, Ethics Commission, right? We've had 2 city council members indicted, and our Ethics Commission gets peanuts as part of the budget, and the Civil and Human Rights Commission, it's almost like a joke that they would even pretend that that's a real thing with that little funding. So here's just a graphical representation of the police, fire, and then all other departments. You can see the police department is basically has the same level of funding as every other department combined. Pretty shocking. So then, of course, in the original budget that was written, the police, LAPD was given a $130 million increase in their budget. And so when I saw that, and I was looking through that slide that we looked at before that has it by department, right? I'm thinking, oh my God, look at this. The increase in their budget is bigger than almost every single department appropriation on its own, just their increase, right? So it's like just their increase alone would have been the 8th highest funded department. And it's the equivalent of all of those departments on the right combined. Actually, it's more than the equivalent of that. So again, this stuff paints a picture of what are your values for the city. And when I look at this budget, the only value that I can see is that the LA City Council and the mayor, their values are a police state, right? We're going to use the police for every other function. We're going to use the police to respond to every issue in the city, and we're going to fund them enough so that they can be the universal response. And when you're LAPD and you have all this militarized equipment, when you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I think we see that in almost all their interactions, right? Their response is violence, and to make whoever they've been called, they're trying to make those people submit to them. Oh, here's a fun one. So this right here is from the Los Angeles City Ethics Commission, and it shows the LAPPL, the police union, their donations to our city council. And as far, I think this isn't even up to date anymore. Someone, I forget who it was, it might have been you, Jeff, told me that since then, John Lee has accepted a subsequent donation. But yeah, I mean, here it is, right? And I think it's sort of naive to think that things don't happen politically and in our government without considering who's funding these politicians, right? Our system is set up that these people can take unlimited amounts of money, basically, and then those people who give the most amounts of money, they get policy enacted that they want to see. And so why are they pushing back so much against reducing the police budget? Well, according to this, it looks like they've been paid to make sure the police budget continues to increase. And then this was an article from the LA Times, and it broke down 18 million calls that LAPD has received since 2010. And, I think a lot of the time when you hear people talking about, policing and crime and stuff, there's so much fear mongering that goes into it, right? If you get rid of a police officer, someone is going to break into your house and rob you and kill you, right? Well, the reality is, for the size of Los Angeles, we're a very, very safe city. 253 homicides in 2019 is incredibly low for a city of our size. And as you can see, it's a 77% decrease since 1992. And really what this chart shows is that the police aren't responding to violence crime. They're responding to traffic issues, not even responding to calls from citizens. They're just involved in officer initiated calls, which means they decide they're going to go check something out, or they're sitting on the corner because there's been a traffic collision. I mean, that's the overwhelming majority of what LAPD does. So if the overwhelming majority of what they're doing is traffic stuff, why do they need $1.8 billion? Where is that money going? this was just another sort of representation of the budget. I had to keep making this graph bigger and bigger just to get all the different departments to fit on it. But then when you look at it, right, those last 8 or so departments, the appropriations for them are so minuscule compared to the LAPD's budget that they don't even register on this graph. And again, it was sort of the same ones we saw from that that first slide that had the appropriations. All these departments are, I guess, basically considered so meaningless that they don't even get enough funding to show up on a graph of the appropriations by department. And a lot of this stuff, to me, is really important stuff. Again, disability, ethics commission. We already, I already talked about that. Emergency management. I mean, we're undergoing, an emergency situation now with COVID, and we're coming up to fire season, and that the budgeting for that doesn't even register on this graph. Doesn't make any sense to me. So just another look at, what we're talking about in totality here with the money that the city is appropriating. And then Jeff, go ahead.
Oh yeah, thank you, Zach, so much for kind of presenting that information to us, because I think we don't, the budget is so opaque and we don't really have a lot of visibility to it. And to your point, it's like there's a million different versions of it, and you can never be sure. It's like, oh, this one says that the budget or the police budget is X%, whereas this other version of it says it's Y%. So just thank you for walking us through that. So what I wanted to go over is kind of an introduction to the people's budget and kind of what that means. And so my name is Jeff. I'm with the West Valley People's Alliance. I'm not directly affiliated with the people's budget, so this information is really just kind of high level general stuff. But the People's Budget LA is a coalition of a bunch of different organizations around LA, including Black Lives Matters LA, us, the West Valley People's Alliance, People's City Council, LA Can. If you go to the People's Budget website, it's a lot of, if you're familiar with the progressive organizations in LA, it's a lot of exactly what you'd expect. K-Town for All, DSA LA, all the big hitters. And so really what, at a high level, this is kind of the budget breakdown that the People's Budget really represents. And so what these percentages really mean is basically, this is kind of based on the survey responses and kind of what people in those survey responses said, here's what we want to fund. So I wanted to compare this, if you see that tiny little sliver of 1.6% for law enforcement and policing versus this. I just think it really presents a stark contrast between, what our current budget looks like and what our, what we think should be prioritized instead. And so basically the People's Budget, So basically these numbers are a breakdown of over 20,000 people who responded to the survey. And the survey is still open, and you can still respond and put in your own kind of opinions and answers. And we'll share a link to that if you like. And so the other thing I wanted to point out is, so some of these kind of subcategories under the larger umbrellas, some of these are kind of like replacing a lot of the functions that the LAPD currently serves. So, something like housing and housing security here under the Universal Aid and Crisis Management, like that would basically eliminate some of what the LAPD is responding to when it comes to, doing sweeps and things like that. But yeah, so some of the other examples here, food security, providing healthcare and housing, direct economic assistance, kind of a lot of things like that. And we'll have a larger breakdown right after this. So then another category is built environment. So libraries, parks and rec, public transportation, public works, etc. And then here's kind of what, would replace the bulk of the LAPD current kind of functions. And so, we don't need the police responding to mental health crises like we talked about earlier. We would rather have mediators who can de-escalate situations instead of sending in kind of armed response to, disturbances between, neighbors or whatever it might be. And so here is kind of, again, these percentages basically represent, you can see at the top here, it's how survey respondents responded with, we should fund this particular category with maximum or moderate investment. And so, yeah, kind of like I said, some of this is not one-to-one with current departments, and some of it may kind of require some reimagining of what some of our departments and services look like. But I think that's all kind of part of, reimagining public safety and reimagining our budget. So with that, I think we might be a couple minutes early, but I would like to introduce Reverend Eddie Anderson of the People's Budget LA, if he has joined us yet. But otherwise, we might be able to take a question if anybody has some.
Hi.
Hey, he's here.
Yeah, good to be with you all. So, Geoff, thank you for your presentation and kind of priming the pump and letting everyone know what's going on with the People's Budget LA. I am Reverend Eddie Anderson. I am the senior pastor of McCarty Memorial Christian Church in the West Adams neighborhood in South Los Angeles, an organizer with LA Voice and a member of Black Lives Matter and Clergy for Black Lives, and been working with the People's Budget LA since its formation. And so I'm glad to see some of you all again. I know some of us were on a phone call together when we were talking to your city council, and Mr. Blumenfeld. And so good to see you all again as we talk about the People's Budget LA. People's Budget LA came out of a question that Black Lives Matter Los Angeles has been having for the last 5 years, which is, why do we spend so much money on the police? Over 54% in some year, this year, and some year, between 50% and 54% of the budget is always spent on policing, which is around this neoliberal idea of arming our ways out of conflict, right? We saw it happen through the 80s. And so every mayor in Los Angeles has increased the police budget, whether it was crime or no crime, it didn't matter. We've always increased the budget, and that's always bring a bigger burden on low-income communities, Black communities, brown communities. We've seen that more and more in a militarized police state. So this year, during COVID-19, when we all saw a global pandemic really arrest, for lack of better words, the world, Black Lives Matter asks the question again: why are we spending so much money on the police? So we had a meeting in South Los Angeles of Black leaders, over 50 Black leaders, now it's coming out to about 75 Black leaders and organizations, got together and asked the question, what can we do? Because we saw the disproportionate amount of Black people dying from COVID-19. We saw the essential workers going to work and being treated almost as sacrificial workers and getting COVID-19 at a higher rate. We saw the lack of testing across LA, especially in Black and brown communities. And we said, there has to be something done. Why are we spending so much money on police? We asked the question again. The 55 demands were written, and those demands were sent to every single member of city council as the Black LA demands. The Black LA demands said things like, we need testing now in South Los Angeles and in East Los Angeles. We need it to be free. We need to make sure that you're not recording the data and using it for other scientific purposes, but that you're giving us our data, that you are making sure that the schools and libraries, which have been disinvested from, are up to par so that our students can learn now that they're all at home. We need to make sure that they have access to technology, because internet is not a given for a lot of people in Los Angeles, especially in South Los Angeles, East Los Angeles, and families who are essential workers. So we say we need these things now, and the way you can pay for it is by cutting the police budget, right? We saw that The city council had already brought out that they were going to furlough at least 16 departments, which is about every department in City Hall. And they were also going to cut the budgets or freeze the budgets in those things. All those members are represented by unions, and those budgets were going to be cut. But what we saw that the LAPD budget was going to be increased by like $300 million. We said, whoa, whoa, whoa. You can't be increasing budgets for the police and cutting everyone else's pay and furloughing all the city workers who are essential workers who people are calling for. We need food, we need healthcare, we can get tested. Those people are being laid off and not be able to test in South LA. And so we said there's a big problem. Black Lives Matter LA, Melina Abdullah and others got together, called in a coalition of people like Community Coalition, like the ACLU, like the People's City Council, like Ground Game LA, call those folks together, LA Voice, and called those together and said, let's create a people's budget. And so Geoff went over some of the categories and how we got there, and basically the idea of what does participatory budgeting look like in Los Angeles. The budget as it was written with the police increase was going to be pushed through City Hall, and it was going to be a unanimous vote, just a rubber stamp on it. Because, as you may know, may not know, the mayor writes the budget, gives it to his council, like legal counsel, budget counsel, then they send it over to City Hall, and they usually just vote for it. We have budgeting committees, but they don't really change as much. We said, no, that's not okay in the middle of a global pandemic. We need to have a say-so around making sure our budget reflects our values and our morals. And so People's Budget LA was born. We immediately got to work. So in the 30 days, so the first report that you saw was all done in the first 30 days of the People's Budget LA. In the first 30 days, we propped up a website. We went on air. We did op-eds. We lobbied City Hall, forced them to have budget meetings, got in contact with the president of City Hall, Nuri Martinez, and said, hey, there's a problem. We have to change this. And then George Floyd was lynched in the streets in Minnesota. And it changed everything, because he said, if you were tone deaf before, and before only 2 city council people responded to the Black LA demands, he said you can't be tone deaf now because you are seeing the entire nation is literally on fire. It's literally calling us, and I'm a pastor, so when I say on fire, I also see the image of Moses, right? Seeing the burning bush and saying, we got to do something now, not tomorrow, but now. And so we forced City Hall to have meetings, to have a hearing, the first of its kind, where it brought in People's Budget LA, and we presented the 24,000 results that we got. We presented and told them 24,000 people, the same amount of people that CNN uses for a national poll on the president. So it is substantial. We presented and told them that over 400,000 people had visited the website, and over 200 countries had visited the website to learn about what is LA doing in their budgeting process and what is this People's Budget LA. We saw the movement being copied in New York. We saw it being copied in Minnesota. We saw it being copied in over about 15 to 20 cities initially across the nation, major cities. People were saying, why do we have these bloated police budgets? From there, we did actions. And so you may have saw the action at the mayor's house. We had thousands of people show up to the mayor's house and say, we need you to adopt a people's budget. You may have saw the actions that as we were protesting for George Floyd, we went over to City Hall and we said, we want a people's budget now. And you heard the cry, defund the police. Now, when I say defund the police, some people will say, Pastor, isn't that radical? And I will always respond and remind folks, when our ancestors, Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass and Sojourner Truth, wanted to get rid of the system of slavery, they said abolish slavery, not to reform it, not to reimagine slavery, not to figure out how the best economic outcome for those in the South and the North. They said abolish it, right? We know that policing, as we have it now, the progenitor of policing, or the thing that gave us policing, were slave patrols and also slave catching in the North, right? That's where we got policing from, right? When we say protect and serve, initially it was property, and my ancestors were property in America, right? And that's what they were protecting and serving, right? They was making sure that the property was in check. And so when we say defund the police, we are carrying on that legacy of saying we want to get rid of systems that have oppressed us. If you look back throughout American history, the way that we have enforced policing is more around control of bodies and property, keeping people mainly in their place, right? We even hear false narratives, right? Where people, every time we say defund the police, someone says, what about black on black crime? I'm just gonna talk about it because we're here. That's neighbor on neighbor crime. If you look at any statistics, right? In any neighborhood, right? The people who usually kill you are your neighbors. It's not like black people are driving from South LA to the Valley to kill somebody. That's not happening, right? So we're saying defund the police because it is a system that is continuing to oppress us and props up what I like to call, what Reverend Lawson calls, plantation capitalism, right? It props up a system that continues to oppress us, and we know we have different imaginations. We have a moral imagination that says we can fund services, we can fund healthcare workers, we can fund mental health providers, we can fund DOT workers to do the things that police are beginning to do. Because if you read any LAPD report in the newspaper, they will be the first to tell you, we aren't trained social workers, right? We aren't trained mental health workers. Why are you responding to all of these calls? Like they're overworked. And so we're saying, let's cut their budget. Let's start with the increase, but let's defund the police. What we saw was that Mayor Eric Garcetti came on and said, we're gonna defund the police by $150 million, which basically means we're gonna cut the raise by $150 million to the LAPD. We said, that's cool, but we said defund the police. And so we saw Herb Weston and Nuri Martinez put forth the motion that came out right as the LA Times did a report. It said, out of the over 1 million calls, 90% of the calls are non-violent calls. They're calls that don't need police officers at all. With a person with a gun does not need to show up. Those things are like homeless calls. You know, people call because they see a homeless person on the side of the street or a house person on the side of the street. You don't need a police officer with a gun to show up for that. We saw it showing up to schools, right? We heard testimonies as we was doing these town halls of Black and brown kids saying the first time they met a police was at elementary school, right? We don't need police officers in elementary school, right? We don't need police officers on school campuses, period. So we lifted up, there's 90% of calls where you don't actually need police. So if we defund the police, what would it look like if we funded and reimagined what public safety looks like? Because safety does not mean just the absence of police, but it means the investment into resources. When you drive around the Valley even, I imagine you will notice there are some neighborhoods where you barely see any police officers, but things seem very safe and calm. I imagine those neighborhoods, and I would recommend to you, those neighborhoods probably have healthcare. They probably have some kind of job stability. They probably have the resources and education that the community needs. There probably are after school programs in those neighborhoods. These are the things that keep us safe, not police, right? Resources keep us safe. Investing in violence interrupters will keep us safe. So we looked at it up. Herb Weston's motion said, let's take away those things that are nonviolent interactions and move them to other departments and do a study on that. So that's the first motion that we got. That was a victory from the People's Budget LA movement. The other one was introduced at the end of last session, which was written by Marquise Harris Dawson and Mike Bonin, which said, okay, we're looking at the data, and a lot of times we see the African Americans, LA Times did a study on this as well, get stopped 5 times more than their white counterparts in Los Angeles, right? We get stopped 5 times more. So if you know any of your Black friends, they may have said, or brown friends, they may say driving while Black, driving while brown is a crime in Los Angeles, right? That's because the data shows we get stopped 5 times more, and usually it becomes maybe a violent interaction or more of a harassment interaction is not policing, right? And police officers said, well, that's how we do our policing. We do pretextual stops on people. And we said, no, what would it look like if we lived in a society where I don't have to talk to my child? I don't have a child yet, but I don't want to have to talk to my child and give him the same conversation that my dad gave me around when a police officer pulls up behind you. Here are the 8 things you have to do to make sure that you stay alive, right? That's the real conversation that happens in Black families. That's the real conversation that happens in brown families, right? Here, we don't want to fear the police. So what would it look like if the Department of Transportation pulled you over and said, sir, I noticed you had a broken tail light. Either I can help you fix this tail light, or I can give you a fix-it ticket for your tail light to get fixed. What would it look like for someone to say, okay, you're driving under the influence? What if we put a boot in your car? We're gonna, either take it to your house or send it to the pound yard, and we're gonna figure out a way to get you home. And we have one of our assistants could take you home, right? Because usually if you see a police officer pull over someone, I don't know how they do it in your neighborhood, but in South LA, if a Black person gets pulled over by a police officer, there's usually 3 or 4 police cars coming anyway, and they're just there to intimidate, right? So what do we do if we use our resources in a better way to really put us forward? What would it look like for us to actually have healthcare all across Los Angeles that is affordable and accessible and that the city can invest in? You may not know this, but the city of Los Angeles does not have a Department of Health. The city of Los Angeles contracts with LA County for the Department of Health. So when you see someone you have a mental health break on the sidewalk who's houseless, when we call, that gets routed to the county. What if the city actually invested the money to have a city task force to partner with the county so we can actually have more people on the street? This is what People Budget LA is asking. This is what People Budget LA is demanding when we are saying reimagine public safety. This reimagine public safety and defund the police language has also gone national, as you can see, but it's also gone statewide, right? So Sidney Comlager, who's the assemblywoman out of the 53rd district in South Los Angeles, which is South Los Angeles and Culver City, wrote a bill that is going through the California Assembly right now that is suggesting that we do exactly what we're talking about in the city, that we move away for a nonviolent cause, and we move away and invest in things like social workers, mental health providers, interventionists, right? That we do these things and that we reroute 911 calls. Everything doesn't go straight to the police, right? You have an issue, you call 911, right? 911, there's someone in my front yard, what do? They send the police officer out. Well, they probably should send a social worker out, right? There used to be pet teams in LA. If you lived in LA long enough, you may not remember those. Pet teams, they got rid of those, right? They said they weren't effective. What if we actually have these people who were trained to come out and talk to people and talk people down and make sure people get the services that they need? And so really what we are saying in People Budget LA is that we want to fund services and not police. We're not saying that we don't want any police presence at all. We're saying defund the police and rethink something new, right? Rethink something that does not come from an oppressive system. Rethink the way that we are ensuring public safety in our neighborhoods, and so that wherever you drive, you can feel that you will be treated. Yes, things like bias may pop up, but we can do training for that. But for me, reason why I've lost faith in the LAPD policing is, I'll give you a tangent, was about 3 years ago, still along with Black Lives Matter, a friend and I started Trust Talks LA, where we would have conversations with police officers and community members. And we try to do this whole, let's come to an understanding and reimagine policing. And when we were doing that, an officer said to me, he said, "Reverend, you're doing a good job with this, but the truth of the matter is, it's not the training in the academy that you need to change, it's the beat officer training. Because when you do a ride along, that's where you learn how to be a police. And when you do a ride along, that's where you get phrases like Blue Lives Matter instead of Black Lives Matter." That there was a signal to me when I talked to this officer that we have to rethink and reimagine what public safety totally looks like in America, and especially in Los Angeles. So People Budget LA is doing that. It's saying fund services, not police. So I'm open for questions, and I'm here with you all for the next, I don't know, 45 minutes or so. I'll turn it back over to, I guess, Gio or Carlos.
To me,
Olivia.
I'll take it. Thank you, Reverend
Olivia.
Anderson. No worries. Thank you so much. So what we're going to do right now is have just a 10-minute Q&A with you, if you're open for questions right now, Reverend Anderson. And then we're going to go into little breakouts where we're going to discuss more like with each other in smaller groups about how we can reimagine, right, what defunding the police would look like for our community here. So if you have questions right now for Reverend Anderson, feel free to drop those in the chat, or you could raise your hand and ask it live. Feel free, Pilar is also putting instructions in the chat that you can also just go ahead and unmute yourself, yeah, or enter a question in the chat box.
Sure, I see Alana asked a question about Department of Health. So the city of Los Angeles does not have their own health department. The city of Los Angeles contracts with the county of Los Angeles Health Department for services. And so when you call the city of LA and ask for a health worker, or you want to get information, they're going to reroute that call to the county. And so it's a contract between the two. LA can have their own health department, and they can do that in collaboration with the county if they want to. We just haven't decided to fund that in the city of Los Angeles.
I see a hand from Erica Contreras.
Okay, let's go to Erica in a second. I have another question in the chat. It says, the response I hear from many people when you bring up Defund the Police is, what about violent crimes and how would that be addressed? Who's calling for a break into your house, for example? Yeah, so wonderful question. So there's a two-pronged answer to this. When we say defund the police, we do, I mean, in all intents and purposes, until we can create a new system for violent crimes, we know that police officers will still be a presence the way we have it now until we can fully create a new arm. We've seen this happen with like cahoots and things of that nature across the country. So when we say defund the police, we're also saying right size the budget, right? And really shrink the budget down to the things that we essentially need right now. And let's start moving the money in different areas. Also, I would lift up, we were also talking about violence interrupters. So the city has a program called GRID, which we've had for the last 15 to 20 years. It's been funded at the same level for 15 to 20 years. What GRID is a program that takes folks who are formerly members of these gangs and things of that nature who know about violent crimes, maybe have committed violent crimes, and it pays these interventionist workers to go in and stop violence before it happens, or to show up on the scene when violence happens to figure out from the community what's going on. We haven't really funded that program to the level that we need to, but what we have known through the data is that the majority of your peace treaties, oh goodness, what happened to my, did it just die? Hello?
We can hear you.
Yep. Oh, okay. My screen did something weird.
We still see you and hear you.
Okay. The majority of the peace treaties that we see happening in East LA, in South LA, is done by violent prevention workers, right? So these are GRID workers who go out, pay little to no money, they're on the front lines, they're going to parks, they're going to talk to actually gang members, the people who've committed the violence and harm in communities, and they're negotiating peace, right? They're creating safe passageway zones across the city. You don't hear about this on the news, but is another way that we can stop violence in our streets and crimes in our streets as well. And those are already a city department. We just need more funding. Looks like we had Erica next. So Erica, go for your question.
Hi, thank you for being here. I guess I have two questions, but as an ally, where can we be the most effective? That's basically it.
Thank you for that question. So this affects all of Los Angeles, right? And so your city council folks really need to hear from you. And I know there was a group of you all who joined us in the meeting with your city council person, and your city council person, Bloomfield, lacks, sorry to say it, lacks imagination around a different way of having public safety. And so you all contacting him and saying there's a different way that we can do safety in our neighborhoods. And here are, People's Budget LA has shown you some data. And here's our voice as well to reaffirm and to say, we believe there's a different path that we could take. It's very helpful. City council, various city council members are releasing their own public safety surveys that are mimicking what People's Budget LA is doing, just to hear from their own constituents around what they want. So we need your help there as well. And these are ways that you can uplift your voice from your community to your elected officials, saying, here's what we believe, and here's how we see a better Los Angeles. And People's Budget LA has given us the roadmap to do so.
We're going to give you links to some of that as well, Erica, as
Great.
we continue here. Yeah.
Thank you. I had a second question. May I, or do you have a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. I heard you mention some programs that are already in effect that would help to take over some of these jobs that police officers aren't trained to do. Could you repeat maybe what those are, and maybe are there other ones that you didn't mention? I guess my point to this is there needs to be a plan. I guess they're most likely going to ask, like, well, what's the plan if we're not going to have police officers come out there? And I guess since there are already programs in place, that's like a huge springboard for how to reimagine. Thank you.
Sure. So there's a few examples that I looked it up, and I'll get some more concrete examples. So when we're talking about houselessness, you are probably familiar that the agency that is tasked with taking care of houselessness in Los Angeles is LAHSA. So LAHSA has these quote unquote like care teams that go out. But right now, what they're mainly doing is they're giving their trained professionals who are outreach workers, most of these folks are houseless folks who will begin to work for LAHSA again. They also have mental health workers on these teams, as well as like social workers on these teams to help folks. But they also now have the police, right? And so usually what that does is that usually turns what could be a peaceful interaction to help someone find housing or get off the street or get the care they need into a more tense or violent interaction, which usually ends up in sweeps instead of services, right? And so those like working with LAHSA to make sure that they have the resources they need for their teams so that they don't need police officers to join them is one way we could see a shifting and reimagining public safety. We talked about back in the day in Los Angeles used to be PET teams, right? Where they would send out social workers and mental care workers that will come out for if you had a person with a mental health issue. So say your brother has schizophrenia and your brother is having an episode and grabs some scissors or something, and you need to talk them down. Well, right now, the biggest mental health provider in Los Angeles is LA County Jail, right? So we are saying, let's reimagine so that you can have those mental health workers and a social worker and the fire department to come out to your house to talk the person down, give them the things that they need, maybe get them the medicine that they need. The county has department services where it's free mental health provision, but you got to have connections to get there, right? And so we want to make sure we're closing the gaps and things like that. We talked about violence, we talked about the GRID program, and also violence interventionist workers who their sole job is to stop violence before it happens or to show up on the scene when violence has happened, right? And one of the things that one of the violence prevention workers, his name is Skip, who runs Second Call, which basically takes folks who are formerly incarcerated and gives them new jobs in the city to do work. He talks about all the time is that when we have enough resources, we can go ahead and stop violence before it happens. But if violence does occur, we can show up and we can be able to do wraparound services for folks, because if you know someone got shot in your neighborhood, if you call the police, then the police have to create that at the crime scene, which usually ends up with the person dying, because if you would have called the fire department first, right, and the fire department should have seen, the fire department can give you medical care, right? But before then, right now, the way it's set up, there's a time frame that the police have to set up basically a perimeter and create a crime scene. So people usually are losing their life in that interaction as well. So those are just some of the ways that we've talked about it. And then also talking about reinvesting in society, in capital, in Black and Brown neighborhoods, and in your neighborhood, right? So you live in the Valley, there's parts of the Valley that see no investment in the community. Your community centers are not funded to the places they need to be. Your public space and green space are not funded where they need to be. After school programs and emergency programs aren't funded to where they need to be, and those are usually city type programs. Those things create public safety as well. Another question.
Thank you. I think Zach was up next with a hand raised. He also put his question in the chat.
Oh yeah. So Reverend, yeah, thank you so much for being here and everything you've shared. So this is sort of an issue that I run into all the time when I'm trying to like break this stuff to our committee or our council. Is some people are just not swayed by pleas to empathy, right? And you have to sort of give them like, you know, what am I getting out of this, right? So like, and especially, I think especially in the West Valley and West Hills, like if you look at the demographic breakdown of the people who live in West Hills, right, it's sort of older, affluent white people who are not, you know, unfortunately, this doesn't, not only does it not touch their lives, but they don't really seem to have any empathy for the situation. So my question is basically, have you found any sort of methods to, okay, like I can't pull on this person's like, you know, empathy. Here's what this will do for you. Have you come across any sort of good methods for that?
Yeah, when we say what this would do for you, we say what does it do for Los Angeles? So in your neighborhood, when you look around and you see the deficit in services in your neighborhood, every neighborhood in Los Angeles city has some deficit where they need resources, right? We say those things can be funded. So houselessness is the biggest issue in Los Angeles. When you call a police officer to stand outside of a transitional house for a houselessness, that overtime pay is $400 an hour. $400 an hour. Now take that and multiply that by all of the centers in your neighborhood. You will calculate there are literally hundreds of thousands of dollars that can be reinvested into your neighborhood, that can be reinvested into making sure people are actually taken off of the street, not arrested, put in jail for 30 days, and then sent right back to your corner, right? But actually giving the services that they need. And that's the main argument that most people who, if they don't have empathy, if they don't understand the police state as we know it in Black and brown communities across Los Angeles, they do understand that houselessness or homelessness is the largest problem we have to face. And what we are literally doing is giving the police the majority of the budgets. When we funded HHH, right? Like almost 50% of that money went towards policing, because policing are the first responders to houselessness. That system has not worked because homelessness in Los Angeles County went up by 13%. And after COVID-19, we can expect it to go up even more because people can't pay the rent, right? And so what we really need to do is double down on equipping people with services and sending out an army, if you want to do military terms, an army of healthcare providers, mental health workers, an army of first responders to really do wraparound services to get people in the housing that is available, or to make sure that Project Room Key is working to its full capacity, right? These are the services that we need to really make our neighborhoods safer, because I live in, my church is in West Adams, and the main thing people care about is, oh, we have homeless people, what if they break into my house? Well, if we could send out a mental health care worker who can give them services, they won't be breaking into your house, because then they will have their needs met, right? And so this is the rubber hits the road. Do the math around, is it really worth $400 an hour for them to sit outside your house when all they can really do is arrest them if it becomes violent, right? Because it's not illegal to be homeless in Los Angeles. Or is it better for us to invest in services for folks?
We've got, I think we have 3 more questions here that we're going to do, and then we'll go into the breakout groups. So the next question was from Carlos. You had your hand raised. Go ahead, Carlos.
Sure, thank you. Thank you so much, Reverend Anderson. I was wondering that, in the past month or so, we heard, right, like that the city council passed a budget. There was, some cuts to the LAPD. And so what now, right? Like, so if you can just explain a little bit more about like why and what we can do, not only on the contact team, right? Like, but like, why is it important to continue to engage on the budget and budget conversations right now, given that the budget was passed by the city council?
Wonderful question, Carlos. So the budget that we have now is based upon projected revenues that the city will not get because of COVID-19. That's just the truth, right? And so that means basically what we are on is like a quarterly budget where we're going to go back and revisit and figure out, all right, now given the money that we have received through revenues, how do we now apportion that money throughout the city to provide care for our folks? We are really pushing and encouraging everyone to be a part of reminding your city council people, here are the alternatives that we could be funding, right? Similar to what we've seen on the county level, which you all will have a chance to vote for in November, which is Reimagine LA, where the county is putting it to all of the citizens say, should we spend 10% of our budget every year to fight things like homelessness, alternative incarceration, youth departments, and healthcare? Should we do that, right? Which is a crazy, why are we asking that question? Should we do that already? But city council is having that same kind of conversation. And so accountability is big. So when you call in, remind them, hey, 90% of the calls are nonviolent. Are we taking seriously the proposals put forward by community that we can fund other alternatives, and continue to lift that up, because they have to revisit the budget by every 4 months because we don't have the money, right? And so think about this. We don't have the money for the budget that we have, but yet we gave an increase in pay to police officers. I don't know what house you grew up in my house, right? If we don't have the money, we go cut off the things that are the most expensive and figure out how to reroute the things that are most essential to our needs. That's what we're asking the city to do as well.
Thank you for that. So let's see. So the next question is from KM. How can we best put pressure on city council members to advance the people's budget? A number of incumbents were reelected already this year, so we won't have the immediate opportunity to hold them accountable electorally. And we are going to talk about this more at the end, but I want to give you the opportunity. I know you're also just, that was a great, that you just pointed out about specifically what we can say, right? About 90% of calls, but is there anything else you would like to speak to for KM's question?
No, I've kind of addressed that a little bit, but I would say, I know you all going to talk a little bit later once I get off around like actions. And one action that I talked to your planning team about was writing a letter to Bloomfield and saying, you know, we need more than $150 million cut, and we need you to actually stand on the side of people. That's something today that you can do that he claims he wants to hear from his constituents. So that's all of you. So that's something that could really make a difference, because he also sits on those budget committee meetings, and he needs to have that in the back of his mind that my people want something different.
And our last question here is from Trey. Could you offer additional examples of other communities or cities outside California that have sought to reimagine public safety? What worked and what didn't?
Yeah, so we saw, I guess the biggest one you saw was that in Minneapolis, you know, where George Floyd was killed, they're going to basically dismantle their police department and rethink what that looks like. We saw this in Newark, New Jersey as well, which was ranked as one of the most murderous cities in the nation. They took seriously, and actually the gentleman who went to consult with them was from from Watts in Los Angeles, right? Brother Akil, who came up with the frame Reimagine Public Safety, and he went to Newark, New Jersey. They completely scrapped their police department and rethought and reimagined public safety looks like. They still have a form of police there, but crime is dropped significantly. It's over, almost half, more than half of the crime has disappeared in their city, right? So we saw that in Newark, New Jersey. We've seen in Portland, right? There's this in Oregon, there's the Cahoots program, which our city council is looking at as well as an alternative to policing as well. We've seen in New York that people put a lot of pressure on, and their cut is going to be around about $1 billion from their police budget, which is crazy, right? About $1 billion from their police budget, and they're going to reroute to services in their city as well. So we've seen this happen kind of like rolling across the nation. And in California, of course, you know, San Francisco has voted to really kind of like rethink their public safety and really defund their police and think about what is the right size for their police budget that they do have, and what should they be expanding in this moment as well.
Thank you so much for that. Those are great examples. And I see also Pilar and Jeff are sharing some links in the chat too, to where you can read about cities and how that's worked for them. Thank you so much, Reverend Anderson. Please feel free to stick around with us. We're gonna now be going into some breakout groups, and in the breakouts, so each one will have a facilitator, but what we're gonna do is just introduce yourselves, share reactions about what you heard, and then what we wanna talk about is what areas, departments, or programs do you think that funding should be going to when we take those funds away from the police? And then each group, it's just gonna be 5 minutes, and then assign someone to share back, and we'll come back in 5 minutes to this larger group and hear what everybody thinks. And those discussion questions are also in the chat. I'm not sure how it works. When do we appear in groups? Oh, you should get an invitation. Okay.
Hi, Mario.
Hola, hola. ¿Estabas en otro grupo?
Sí, estaba en un grupo, pero nada más era yo y luego entró una persona y la persona se fue.
Ok.
Tú estás en el principal, ¿no?
Sí, bueno, yo no me he metido en ninguno porque estoy monitoreando todo el asunto.
Ajá. Deja ver si me meto otra vez y si no regreso.
Está bueno.
A ver, que parece que me va a mandar al mismo grupo, no vi a nadie. Ahorita vengo.
Ok.
Ya regresé.
Eh,
Y Pilar igual, mira.
sí,
Le voy a decir que se salgan ellos solos.
se pueden meter a...
No creo que nos dé la opción de meternos. Ya en el que estamos asignados, eso fue.
puedo mover a un anchor. Lo voy a mover.
Ok, sí, buena idea. ¿Cuántas personas hay en total todavía?
Tres personas.
Pero digo, en total, ¿tú puedes ver?
Estoy ahí. Había un total de 26 personas. Habíamos.
Ajá. ¿Todavía estás en número más o menos? No.
¿Cómo?
Ya no, todavía no puedes ver ese número todavía, o total.
No, ya no lo puedo ver.
Ajá, yo me imagino que
Solo
algunas
puedo ver
personas se
dos, que es tú y yo
salieron.
que estamos en...
Sí, sí.
No me da la opción para mover a Anchor.
Oh, entonces diles que se regresen. Ah. Es que yo creo que varias personas se fueron, no quisieron ser parte de la conversación.
Sí. Otros están platicando. Hay varios grupos. Hay por lo menos 4 grupos. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 grupos. Y tú y yo.
Sí. Ah, está bien. Sí, la compañera que se había unido al mío no habló. Ahí traté de hacer conversación, pero se salió. Me imagino que se debe haber salido de la junta.
Sí, yo quise mover a Anchor, pero no me da la opción. No sé por qué. Mm. Hey guys.
We hope you all had good conversations. We're going to give it a moment before we open it up for any reactions. Just making sure everybody is able to look back in. And so as we shared before we went into the breakouts, if hopefully someone was able to get assigned as a person to share back. If not, whoever wants to share back from each of the groups. You don't have to share word by word, but just any reactions that came up, any thoughts, and also kind of like any responding to the question, areas, programs, or departments that you think should be funded. And then funding should be going to. Anyone would like to share?
I'll share if that's okay.
Yes, thank you. And if you don't mind sharing your name and maybe where you're coming.
Sure. I'm Stacey McKenna. I actually live in North Valley. I'm in Sunland. And in our conversation, we mental health and homelessness definitely came up first, but realistically, I think we all strongly agreed that, fill out those bottom levels of Maslow's hierarchy: food, shelter, mental health, physical health, those very basic rudimentary things, which will help solve all the other things around it. And so putting money into making sure everybody has those very basics at the bottom of that pyramid is where that money should be going.
Thank you, Stacy, and thanks for connecting to today's assembly. Anyone else or someone else would like to go next?
I'll go.
I'll go ahead.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, so Zach Willett here again. Obviously, the first thing that it came up in our group was homelessness and mental health. Olivia mentioned how we just keep ostensibly dumping more and more money into these things, right? There's like a proposition on every ballot, and where does this money go, and why hasn't any of it had any material effect, seemingly? And then the other thing we talked about, and this was sort of something I brought up because I've spoken to my brother who used to work in a district attorney's office in Miami, and I think it's sometimes overlooked is, there's policing, right? And when someone gets arrested, and that once the arrest happens, that person goes into an entirely new sort of machinery now, the prosecution of that person, right? And a lot of the time, these people are being defended by really understaffed and overworked public defenders who don't have any chance at actually like providing a good and competent defense. And so I would like to see more funding going to public defenders, like flood those offices with actual, professional lawyers who can provide real legal counsel to these people. And also with the new creation of sort of the tenant advocacy thing for people who've been kicked out of their apartments by the landlord and believe that they have a claim, right? I'd love to see that department also be staffed with a lot of lawyers, because I think we all realize we're facing like an unprecedented wave of evictions that are probably going to happen. And have we funded that project enough to defend all these people? I guarantee you we haven't. And so it's sort of underlooked, right? What happens and how do we keep people from originally becoming homeless is, if we can have someone advocate for them once they've been evicted and, they don't ever become homeless, then, we're at least not adding to the ranks of our unhoused population.
Thank you so much, Zach. Yeah, that's a really good point, especially the current situation that we're facing now. Others that want to jump in. I thought I saw Trey was unmuting at some point, but I don't see him on the screen anymore. Maybe he stepped out. Others that want to share reactions from like the presentation and also the speech from Reverend Anderson, and where should we see our money going into?
I'll speak on our group. Let's see if I can. Yeah, so we as a group, we really appreciated the format that this was laid out. It was really accessible, the arguments that were made, and also appreciated the discussion that Zach brought up about how do we have these conversations with people who might be coming from a place of privilege where they can't necessarily remove themselves from it. And I think that this presentation, it'd be great to access this recording for future, just to share with people, because I think it could spark some interesting conversations. One thing that was interesting that we talked about briefly towards the end is that it's this act of reimagining. It's a great word to use, reimagining, and it's also such a complicated process that's going to be that's moving forward. And what does that reimagining look like? Because as great mental health services and social services are so great, but they also have a history of systemic racism and institutionalized racism within them. So how do we prevent these mental health service personnel from becoming new forms of police? How do we interact with that history? And we're not obviously going to be able to solve it just here, but I think these conversations that we're having are a very useful step. And whether or not somewhere in the funding we could apply more concentration to that sort of research and that sort of work within our own communities. I don't know what particularly that would look like, but that was just some interesting points from our conversation.
Thank you so much, Chase. Was there anyone else? Yes, Olivia.
I was just going to say I really appreciated Reverend Anderson's points about investing in communities and asking what safety means and ideas of what does it mean to have things be safe, and that that in communities where like where I live, West Hills, there aren't a lot of police and things are very calm, as he was pointing out. And so when you're in other places in the city where it seems like you need that police presence, it's so heavily policed that you have to ask yourself, then what do you think that you're dealing with? And I think that this comes all the way down. I taught in South Central for a long time, and I was in middle school, and we would routinely, and still in the school that I'm in now, we have the police come, not school police. These were LAPD officers in South Central that would come and search the kids, right? And I would say you don't have the right. New Jersey versus TLO says that you can't just randomly search students without knowing if they, have done anything, et cetera, et cetera. And yet he, brushed it aside with a police dog. So these are kids who are 12 years old who are having, a police dog come in and sniff their belongings and told to go out. And if that's your first encounter, and you're being policed because you're that unsafe, and where you're going to school is that unsafe, what does that communicate? And so I would advocate as an educator that money needs to be invested in what are you asking, who do you think that the students that you are teaching are? And then what do you imagine for them? What are your visions and dreams that you can make it a safe place that truly is safe for people of color and all people to envision what that space looks like, not just as a white space, but as a space for all people, right, to be valued equally and be given equity when they're treated and funded. And so that takes money. And so I would just build on what he said, that for schools, really equalizing funding and putting it in so that school is safe, not because there are officers with dogs walking around, but because they're given the money they need for the services that they need. Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. It was amazing. I learned a lot.
All right. Thank
Go
you.
ahead, Olivia.
Now I want to take this into a discussion of actions that we can do, right, to try and make this happen, move this reimagined budget forward. So definitely what the People's Budget LA, what Reverend Anderson has asked us to do is to send letters to our city council members. So he specifically was referencing Bob Blumenfield. So the 4 city council members in the West Valley, right, that are Bob Blumenfield, John Lee, Nuri Martinez, and Paul Koretz. So as an organization, we want to put a letter together, but also it would be, really important for us as individual people to send letters and to make calls to those 4 city council members. And we've put together a toolkit that will have like a template letter and a template for a phone call that we're going to share, right? I think tonight, hopefully, or tomorrow, we're going to be able to send that out. Also, join the group, right? Join the West Valley People's Alliance. We have a general meeting for our entire organization next week. Jeff's going to drop the link in the chat. And then we have different committees. The committee that put this event together today is the Racial Justice Committee. We're going to drop that link too if you want to get specifically involved with this. And then the other thing that Reverend Anderson mentioned is that the city council members themselves are putting out surveys because to hear from, right, from the people, their particular like stakeholders and constituents, what they want, kind of the same format as the People's Budget LA did, asking 24,000 people. So we want to make sure that we're on those because, for example, right, John Lee, what he's sending out, right, to his people that he wants to hear from is not, you know, we want to make sure that we're in and that our voices are heard as constituents of these people, even if they don't agree with us necessarily. So what did I want to, oh, so the city council also has a general survey that the city council as a whole has put out a survey that's like the People's Budget LA, and we're going to drop that link right now too, where you can tell the entire city council, similarly to the People's Budget LA, the kind of answers that we just came up with together in our breakout groups about what department do you want the funds to go to. And I think those are all the actions we have right now, right? Join us, like let's work together and let's get these letters out and get these survey responses in. What we're going to do now is just have, I'm just going to open it up one more time to see if anybody has any other questions or anything they want to get in. Feel free to speak up or drop it in the chat right now.
I have one thing that I wanted to add. I do have to run. We have a call for my oldest son's orientation for his first day of high school. So, but I just wanted to say, because the Reverend brought this up about shifting responsibility for traffic stops from LAPD to LADOT. That item, there's a council file on that, and that item is on the Government Relations Committee agenda, or will be on that agenda coming up on Monday, August 17th. So not tomorrow, but the following Monday. And so it would be awesome if we could get, you know, some support for that item. I think we'd all agree on this call that, you know, the less LAPD is involved in everything, the better it is for everybody. So I hope I'll see some of you guys there next Monday.
Awesome. Thank you for that. What was the name of that committee again, Zach?
It's the West Hills Neighborhood Council Government Relations Committee meeting, and it'll be at 7:30. There'll be a link publicly available. I haven't gotten the agenda out fully yet, so if we could hold off on any blasts about it, but it was on last month's agenda and was tabled, so obviously it should be on this month, but I'm hoping to get that out and posted by midweek. So that will definitely be on there.
Awesome, thank you so much.
And I think with just this is Carlos, just to add a little bit more on what Zach is saying, like the bigger picture too, there is that there are neighborhood councils across the West Valley that we can, you know, maybe some of the folks here belong to the Reseda, you know, neighborhood council, or like the Tarzana neighborhood council, or, you know, the Northridge West, wherever area you're part of, you can go to those neighborhood councils and also ask them to take a strong position in support of the people's budget, right? And so that is one other way to also engage in that pressure. Also, those neighborhood councils usually have like a budget advocate, which is kind of like the representative for the neighborhood council to talk about and, you know, envision the budget for the city and budget recommendations. So that is something else that, you know, we all can keep in mind, that folks can keep in mind. So and then lastly, Olivia mentioned like the letter. Also, I mean, we should think about like, you know, how do we do another visit, right? Like Reverend Anderson mentioned that there was a virtual visit with Councilmember Bloomingfield about a month or so ago. We could and should have another follow-up also with with Councilmember Bloomingfield, right? And there's folks in this space that are probably in his district. You know, and you're more than welcome to be part of. If you've never been part of a a visit, like we can also prepare beforehand. So thinking through like what are some ways that we can engage, because they're supposed to have an open door for us, their constituents, and we should utilize that space to show up.
All right, if there aren't any other questions today, I just want to thank everybody for taking the time out of your Sunday to come together and talk about this. We're going to send out a follow-up email too, so that you have like this information and these links coming to your inbox. It might go, just if you don't get something, check your spam. If you use Gmail, it might go to the promotions tab. And yeah, just thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.